South Carolina gun owners have to pay attention or we could end up turning into the next Virginia. That's what we're going to talk about today. And right now, your first question might be like, what are you talking about? You know, it's South Carolina. We're doing great. And that is part of the problem. Not because we're doing great, but because when you're doing good, what does that normally do to people? It makes them content. And when people feel content, it normally allows you to take more chances. But taking chances this November is not what gun owners want to do. So I'm going to build and expand on what I mean there and why South Carolina is the perfect target for anti-gunners going forward. I'll give you my opinions along the way. Of course, I want to hear yours, whatever those might be. I'm sure they will be strong, and that is totally fine. Let me know whether you agree or disagree down below. Let's go ahead and jump right in. So let me start with the build-up here. South Carolina is primed to be in a position like this. Of course, Henry McMaster is going to be leaving. He served his 2 terms, and now we are going to be getting a new governor. And it's interesting because it's one of these states where population is growing. The job market is overall really fantastic. And building and infrastructure and automotive business and everything here is just absolutely booming. But it's also one of those states where we have our freedoms and those freedoms have been expanded, which they should be. And so I think a lot of people think, man, you know, you hear a story from Colorado or Illinois or Hawaii or even Virginia and you're like, gosh, thank goodness I don't live there. But see, this governor race to me is a little bit different because who's running against Alan Wilson is actually Jermaine Johnson. And when you look at his platform, you might think on the surface, if you remove the R and the D next to these people's names, well, you might think, well, yeah, sure, I would vote for that. What Jermaine Johnson right now is running on is basically, you know, lower taxes, lower property taxes, better roads, more pay for law enforcement, better pay for those guys, improving the schools, putting more hospitals in rural areas of South Carolina. All these things sound really good. Actually, when they asked him, Jermaine Johnson said, I don't know if I'm moderate, left, or right. I'm about the people first.
It's called fake news.
But it sounds pretty familiar. Who does it sound like? Sounds like Abigail Spanberger. Now, to be fair, she was definitely moderate in her approach, but she also made it very clear her position on guns. See, Jermaine Johnson has stayed away from that topic. Fortunately, we have history, and history is kept up with these things, and so I can fill you in on exactly what I think his position is on guns, just my opinion, but that's backed with facts because he's got an opinion on firearms. But before I talk about that, one thing you have to realize, in states like Virginia, Tennessee, South Carolina, even North Carolina, Texas, all these kind of places, you have to have somebody that is running on the Democrat ticket to be moderate. They know that. I always think it's kind of interesting, man, when you look at the policies sometimes of the Democrat Party and how extreme they can be, you would think if they believed in them so much that they would all run on those policies. The ones that are trying to win in states like South Carolina try to separate themselves from those policies and make themselves look more moderate because they know if they bring that crap down here and run on that insanity, they're going to lose. So that is why he's running on this platform. I get it. Is it genuine or is it deceptive though? See, that's what we have to kind of realize. We vote on one thing, right? That is firearms. Because firearms are the cornerstone of freedoms. Generally speaking, when people support firearms and pro-gun rights and pro-gun movements and less restrictions, less government interference, typically everything else they support kind of falls in line with the way I believe, and I know a lot of the things that y'all believe in. Doesn't mean they all have to fall perfectly in a line and, you know, like we all agree on freaking everything like robots, that's fine. But generally speaking, if you support gun rights and you oppose any government restriction when it comes to firearms and suppressors and SBRs and all this kind of stuff, already that to me is the foundation for somebody that believes in freedom. The other things kind of fall behind. So I guess the biggest thing is, well, what is Jermaine Johnson's position on firearms? Because it is interestingly void on his campaign stuff and on his website of how he actually feels about the Second Amendment. But fortunately, we don't have to go that far back to see how he feels about the Second Amendment. on his own platform, he talks about he was a victim of gun violence. I think his brother actually ended up losing his life, and we don't want to mitigate that, right? That's a terrible thing. But the pitch for so-called reasonable gun control almost always starts with a personal story. Again, that has nothing to do with him and his family, right? That is terrible, but it always almost starts with a personal story. And so that makes people self-reflect. And if you can get at their emotional core instead of looking at foundational principles, right, then you can start to see where it breaks people down. So they start thinking, okay, well, reasonable gun control, well, give me the pitch. And that's what I see from Jermaine Johnson. It's all about the reasonable approach, the responsible gun owner, the common sense gun control measures. These are the words that are used to soften the approach. Most candidates can't come down in the South or a free state and say, we're coming for your AR-15. How did that work out again for that Beta O'Rourke or whatever his name was?
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47.
I never thought he had a chance in Texas.
Well, yeah.
The former Texas congressman is dropping out.
So you got to soften the approach. And so I found something interesting about Jermaine Johnson, that back in 2021, he wanted to use part of South Carolina's American Rescue Plan funding to put towards gun violence preventative initiatives. But what are these gun violence preventative initiatives? I think it's really a bad kind of way to promote some of this stuff. But if they're talking about promoting or supporting youth in communities, every community, by the way, youth sports, if kids want to, get into baseball or football or stuff, and taking some of that money and supporting those kids and making sure they stay off the streets, and you get them into things that are supportive to all of our communities, dude, I think that's great. I don't know why it has to be called gun violence preventative initiatives, but gun violence preventative initiatives have also been used to pass so-called red flag laws and the boyfriend loophole and universal background checks and safe storage laws. And these are the same things that Spanberger ran under too. That is no coincidence. Now, she did talk about AR-15s or so-called assault rifles and high-capacity magazines. They're standard capacity, by the way. I just throw that term because that's what they say, right, to make it sound scary. But it was a more moderate approach. And what we see now, July 1st, is not moderate. Do I think it'll stand? No. I think Virginia is about to become the example of how you don't mess with gun owners and their rights. That's just my opinion, though. Either way, you don't want another state falling victim to the same type of language. So we know that about Jermaine Johnson. He wanted to use 1% of that American Rescue Plan money for so-called gun violence preventative initiatives. But then there's the constitutional carry debate. And he framed constitutional carry as almost, hurtful to law enforcement. Like somehow giving gun owners more freedom without the permission slip was harmful to law enforcement. Now, there was a section, of course, about constitutional carry where you have no duty to inform officers now. I support that fully because it's really none of their business. They should assume that you are carrying a firearm. Why? Well, it's none of their business, but it's because you're an American. That's not anti-police. That's just keeping it real, right? The permission slip is part of the problem. Again, we support good police, but they should just assume that I am carrying a firearm. I don't know. That's a whole separate thing, but he tried to make it about the police officers and how we didn't support police somehow because we were passing constitutional carry. What I guess, what that really comes down to is how dare you get rid of the permission slip? And he said that there would be repercussions if this passed. By the way, it did pass, thankfully. Well, what are these so-called repercussions? Well, that allows the single dad or the single mom to go out there to buy a firearm, to carry it wherever they are legally allowed to be without waiting on the government, local or otherwise, to come in and say, yeah, we approve you. You can now carry your firearm. That's what the repercussions have been. As a matter of fact, crime has been dropping in South Carolina. And since constitutional carry was passed in places like Columbia especially, the crime has dropped. Gun seizures have dropped. Overall homicide rates have dropped. Does it all tie back to constitutional carry? No. But what it does do is it says South Carolina is a free state. So if you decide that you are going to hurt, harm, threaten, or otherwise try to hurt any American inside of South Carolina, well, those South Carolinians have the ability to use a firearm to protect themselves. It makes people think twice about whether they're going to walk into that grocery store or that gas station. Is it going to prevent everything? No. Right? We already acknowledge this, right? There's lunatics out there. There is a cost to freedom, and it's been paid and continues, unfortunately, to be paid sometimes in tragedies. None of us celebrate that. But again, it always comes down to dangerous freedom or peaceful slavery. Which one do you want? Look, I'm not attacking Jermaine Johnson. I don't know the guy. What I am saying is that South Carolina gun owners have to be careful this November. We have an influx of people from various places, whether that's New York, Illinois, California, some from Florida, Georgia, Texas, okay? The state is growing. The economy here is doing well overall, right? It doesn't apply to everybody. We get that. But overall, the state is in a promising place. But remember when I was talking about it makes people kind of content? Well, I feel like sometimes, even in your own life, you can kind of apply this in a situation. When you feel content, sometimes you're willing to take chances. Sometimes you're like, man, you know what? Things are good. Jobs are here. Businesses are coming. Freedom is here. Why not take a chance with somebody different? And that's Jermaine Johnson's entire platform. We've been doing the same thing with one party for over 20 years. It's time for a change. I say the state's actually improved a hell of a lot in 20 years. So you're right. Why would we change? Go with the party that you know is going to continue to bring the jobs and lower the taxes and fix the roads. Look, it's not a perfect state. The roads suck here. Okay, so just saying, some of these things need to be addressed. But overall, the state's been doing really good. So I asked Jermaine Johnson, you're right. Why would we change? Because what I've seen from the other side is a platform of a bunch of people that run moderately. And then when they get in power, that's when the mask comes off. I can't tell you who Jermaine Johnson is or who he isn't. What I can tell you is that this platform seems very familiar, and I would be very skeptical on believing any of it. In my opinion, we are doing well, and if you want to continue to do well, there's one clear choice for me. I'll leave it right there, dude. That is my opinion. I do not want South Carolina turning into the next Virginia. I didn't want Virginia becoming this version of Virginia because we care about all gun owners. And these things affect all of us in one way or another. I don't know. That's just my opinion, though. I'd love to hear yours. Let me know what you think down below. If you like what I do, consider subscribing. See you in the next one. And as always, holding down.